So recently I installed a set of H&R lowering springs and H&R wheel spacers on my brand new Toyota Supra. And quite honestly, I feel like that is one of the most cost-effective performance modifications to make your car handle better and look a heck of a lot better. Now, I picked all these products up from Fitment Industries. They kind of helped me out with getting the correct specs and everything. I even got 15mm longer wheel bolts to, of course, make this a safe setup. So in today's video, we're going to talk about installing the H&R lowering springs and 15mm spacers all around and how it improved the Toyota Supra. The handling is so much better, which we'll take a test drive and talk more about that. As far as styling, it dropped it 1 inch up front and 3/4 of an inch in back. And then the 15mm got it to where these stock tires and wheels are nice and flush with the bodywork. It looks so much cleaner now that it has the springs and spacers. And honestly, this is a job you can do for like $600 or $700. So it's a pretty affordable way to go. And because the Toyota Supra already comes with adaptive suspension, you really don't need to put coilovers on it. A good set of springs, H&R springs I've had on multiple cars of mine. They are top notch and it really does what you need it to do. And then the wheel spacers, it just looks so good. So then to take just a quick look at the car with a close-up, you can see how those 15mm spacers really get that front tire in the perfect spot, and a 1 inch drop up front really fills out the wheel arch much better than stock. You had some really bad wheel gap in the stock configuration. Moving in back, you could do a 20mm, however 15 still gets it perfectly flush, and then 3/4 of an inch drop, again, really tightens up that wheel gap. So the car looks significantly better. Comparing it to stock, we go ahead and take a look at the other side. I'm certainly super happy with just the overall look now of the Supra. It really looks like a much more hunkered down sports car instead of having wheels sunken into the bodywork and having some 4x4 status for that wheel gap. So car is definitely looking good. No complaints there. All right, so setting off in the Supra. So the biggest thing I like about doing the lowering springs is the fact that we have an adaptive suspension on the Supra, and it's a really good setup. In normal mode, it's pretty soft and comfortable. When you hit sport mode, it stiffens up those dampers to give you that more performance-focused ride. So the fact that the springs, they still give you those two modes. It's not like you have to just delete it all, have a fixed set of coilovers, and you're stuck with a fixed suspension. So you still maintain the two different drive modes that the car comes with, and that is a huge selling point to where you don't need to do coilovers on this car. And because they are adaptive suspension, while you're lowering their new ride height basically, they're adaptive, so they are able to adjust to that without any bad effects. I know in the past, some people would say lowering springs are gonna end up damaging your dampers just because they're designed to be at a certain ride height. I don't think that's the case with adaptive suspension, quite honestly. I've done this on all of my cars that have had adaptive suspension, and years later, things are still perfect. So I'm a big fan of them on a car like this. And it really stiffens up the ride a little bit when you're in the sport mode. In normal mode, I don't think you really notice any difference as far as it being too harsh or anything. You only notice it when you're in sport mode, hitting the turns a little bit harder than you normally would. That's when you're gonna feel it just hunker down a little bit better and have that less body roll. So it really is the best of both worlds with lowering springs on the Supra, because normal mode, it feels like stock. I really don't have an issue. And even though we're dropping the car nearly an inch all around, it honestly doesn't even affect the ride height in the sense of clearance. I can still get over things. I don't scrape on anything getting in and out of my driveway, which is a little bit of a curve I gotta go over. As long as I go at a little bit of an angle, I don't scrape anything. I've never really scraped at all with lowering springs on the Supra. So a 1 inch drop basically is a super conservative drop for the car to where you're not gonna have those slammed car negative effects. And then when you look at the wheel spacers, so H&R wheel spacers is what I did, and they are hub centric, which is the really, really important part. But with them, they have the same lip, just like on the stock hub and just like on your wheel, to where it's perfectly secure. There's no weird weight going to be transferred to the bolts instead of the hub. The weight is on the hub, and then the bolts, of course, just clamp it tight. So you get that quality to where it's no different than if these stock wheels had a 15mm more aggressive offset. So if you do wheel spacers the right way and springs the right way, it's a really good affordable way to just soup up your car and not have any negative effects. I know wheel wheel spacers get a little bit of a bad rap sometimes because they put extra pressure on your wheel bearings, but it's no different than putting a wheel on that has a more aggressive offset. Now, if you go non-hub centric, then you're gonna have a lot of the weight on the wheel bolts, get vibrations. In my wife's Audi S3, you know, we had the wrong hub-centric rings on it. They were plastic, and the car vibrated. It was awful. We put aluminum ones in, and the wobble went away because you had that hub-centric stability. So this setup is definitely good. And I also like, with that slightly stiffer spring rate, you know, when you're flooring it in the Supra, hitting those hard turns, slamming on the brakes, you get less dive, less body roll, and it just sharpens up handling so much. And of course it lowers the center of gravity, which helps handling significantly. And then on top of that, 15mm wheel spacers gives us a 30mm wider stance, which increases stability once again, because now your wheels are farther out, which even further lowers the center of gravity because you have a wider stance. So they do so many benefits, and it's a noticeable difference to where the car handles so much better. It's so much more stable, hard turn. It's even more darty and pinpointy than the factory setup. The Supra's already so good at handling, but now with this setup, you just do whatever you want and the car does it. So I think this is a good conservative setup to where you're not slammed to the ground, you're not too wide, nothing weird. It's a good setup to get all the benefits and none of the downfalls, and it doesn't break the bank at all. So it's a really good setup. All right, so back in the car. Yeah, the stability is just so much better. Now the Supra, one of the best handling cars, especially for the price point. Factory above 100, honestly, it's a little floaty feeling. And in sport mode, it of course tightens that up. But with these springs and the spacers, it tightens it up to where you can go higher speeds and it just feels more planted. I think that wider stance, the lower center of gravity, and the slightly stiffer spring rate really goes a long way just to make the car have that much more stability to it. And I love how there's no negative effects. It doesn't ride back braking or anything like that. Even accelerating through a turn, no big deal. Going back into comfort mode, hitting on cruise control. It's still just as comfortable, refined, and quiet as you would expect. I know some people ask about like weird noises or anything. You shouldn't hear any weird like clicking or clunking. Just make sure everything's tight on the car. But it rides like a factory car once again in the normal mode. And it doesn't feel weird in the steering at all. I know if you do some bigger wheel spacers, you might get a little vibration in higher speeds, but the same thing happens honestly when you go too aggressive of a negative offset. I've been in cars that have like zero offset, and honestly you get a little bit of that wobble in the steering wheel. I think 15mm up front, it's ideal for stock wheels and tires to where you get the flush fit, they look great, and you don't have anything in the steering wheel. I was a little concerned, I wasn't sure how it would end up feeling doing them on this car, but I'm happy to announce that I haven't had anything like that. So it still steers like stock, just is a little bit more pinpointy since those wheels are farther out to where they actually are turning slightly sharper. So I am definitely a fan of this setup. I think if you're looking for an affordable way to make your car significantly better, this thing is so rowdy. This thing is just amazing. All right, so ending thoughts. As we fly around a turn, no complaints honestly with these springs and spacers. I think if you have a Supra and you just really want to dial it up in handling, you don't want to break the bank, and you just want to get the perfect blend of everything, the springs and spacers are so beneficial. Man, the car is so much sharper, so much tighter. Gosh, it's awesome. So I'm definitely a big fan of springs and spacers because it just dials up the car without going crazy. And I waited to film this video a couple weeks after I actually did it. I think I installed these at about 400 miles. I now have 650 miles on this car. I did H&R Springs on my last Supra. H&R Springs are on my GTR and our Audi S3. So I've done these springs quite a lot, and they seem to give you a good conservative drop just to make the car look where it should look from factory. Obviously, cars from the factory are a little bit higher than we would like, but these kind of springs really just dial it up to be perfect. And the handling increases, you can't argue with it. Just really a good way to tighten up your Toyota Supra. So there is my review of the lowering springs and the spacers for the Supra, all from Fitment Industries. They carry everything you need. And not to say I don't have a new set of wheels in the garage ready to go on the Supra, but I love the 2023 wheels so much that I wanted to have this setup, a drivable setup, to where maybe wintertime comes or something to where I want the stock wheels back on the car temporarily. I can at least put them back on with the spacers, and the car's still gonna look good with the lowered suspension. So that's kind of why I went ahead and did the spacers, even though I have new wheels for the car. But I'm definitely excited for this setup, and if you are on a budget where you don't want to go crazy with modifications and new wheels, this is the way to go. Stock wheels on these cars look so cool anyways, so just doing those mods and it makes it really awesome. But check out Fitment Industries down below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I'll see you guys in the next video.